Welcome back, Mimi.
Thank you for having me.
So good to have you here. It's so good to see you. What have you been up to? Tell me.
Oh, well, it's been a busy start to the year already. I mean, I can't believe since we last met, we've now started a new year. We're in a whole fresh time. I'm back in Dubai. I'm actually in Dubai 3 times in the next 3 weeks.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think everything's very busy before Ramadan and before everything picks up. So yes, it's been busy and I feel that empathy is rising. So
that's incredible. I do feel that it is.
You do?
So empathy at work.
Yes.
That's sort of the mission. That's what you've been talking about for the last 5 years, I want to say.
Yep.
You started with the book Softening the Edge.
I did.
And you now have your
current book. I just finished my third.
Have you just?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, I need to update my memos. But the last thing we spoke about was the release of Empathy at Work, which is now out as well as of the end of last year.
It came out in India in October.
That's incredible.
And that one's just in India. So I really felt a desire to write something in India, for India, published from Mumbai. So that's just a part of my soul for India. And then the third one comes out in the US in April.
Well, it's such a vibrant culture and country. I'm obviously a little biased because I originally come from there. My parents come from there. And I was born here. And I can see that there's so much changing in that market as well. There's so much education in India that's needed as well as the rest of the world, because empathy is somewhat not fully understood. While it is on the rise, I feel like there's more to be said and done in this space. So what are the common misconceptions about empathy?
Well, first of all, most people still don't know what it is. So, I say that empathy is rising, and it is. I mean, when I look at just my own journey between when I started 5 years ago and now, it's definitely far more understood. People are talking about it. The fact that I have work every week shows that people want it. But still, for many people, they don't know what empathy is. People think it's a soft skill. So I spend a lot of time teaching people that it's hard.
How would you describe it? Let's hear it from Mimi Nicklin.
For me, I mean, empathy is about perspective taking. Empathy is fundamentally the ability to understand how other people see the world, their experience, their perspective, their opinion. We all see the same things at the same time, but how we see them is very different.
Being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, perhaps.
Exactly. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes, seeing through their lens, how people absorb this show with us today. Everyone that watches your show will engage with it. Will engage differently, will experience it differently, will remember different bits. So fundamentally, empathy is that ability to perspective take, and it is a pro-social skill set. So it keeps us alive, Rowen. It's not just about thriving, it's about surviving.
Oh, that's very interesting. So why do you say surviving? Is it the connect to helping people sort of understand themselves a bit better, understand other people a bit better, and especially in the workplace?
All of it, right? So empathy is built into your prefrontal cortex, so into your brain at birth. Yeah. So for those people that ask, am I born with empathy? Yes.
Okay.
Right? You can choose to use it like any skill.
Even narcissists.
Well, that's a different discussion. So there is a very small proportion of the population actually that is a true narcissist. It's less than 2%. And narcissists do have challenges with using empathy. But the reality is it's a tiny percentage of our world population. So for the majority of people, for babies, we are born with the ability to empathize. It's built into the brain because we are a pro-social species. We need each other to survive.
So we're kind of programmed that way, the neural corrections in our way.
Belonging, connection, just the way that societies grow and thrive is built around us doing it together, right? We thrive when we're connected, and all of the data shows that. So we know actually for chronically lonely people, they statistically die 8 years earlier. So we literally die. We die when we are not connected. We can't heal. We have higher propensity in certain sicknesses. We can recover less fully. There's all kinds of impacts on our health.
I think I read somewhere that, a hug and hugging someone you care about sort of increases our lifespan, and our happiness sort of values go up on the back of like being or building those true meaningful connections. So I think that's probably another check in the box or argument in favor of empathy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are built in such a way that we need to be connected to others. So when two babies are born equally sick, the one that gets more empathy will outlive the other one. When you look all the way back to tribal times, to our ancestors, they knew this. They built their entire tribes. They built the survival of the human race around being connected as societies, which is why the loneliness epidemic is such a big problem. because so many of us are lonely, 52%, and we do really not very well at all when we're alone.
No, I think we are a social species, like you said, and I see it, as a mum with a toddler myself, he and I live for the hugs. Obviously, that might be slightly inappropriate in the workplace. So.
Yes, maybe not ideal.
So what else can we do? Like, what can leaders do differently to empathize with their communities, with their colleagues, with their employees, to engage them and really feel seen and heard in the workforce?
Well, fundamentally, empathy, the backbone to this is listening. So being able to actively listen to other people. And there's a big difference between hearing and listening.
Right.
So a lot of my work is in teaching workplaces, teaching cultures and leaders that exact difference. How do you actively listen to gain insight, to gain understanding from what people are saying?
Right.
So all of my tips around how to improve empathy stem from that connection, from listening.
How incredible. It's one of those undervalued skill sets.
Oh my gosh,
suppose.
so much so, Rowen. We talk about it all the time. We ask people to listen, but we don't teach them to listen. We tell our children to listen, but we don't teach them to
Well,
listen.
we also tell them what to do, and we don't really model it ourselves, do we, a lot of the time? So
Yeah, it's true.
I'm trying to be really cognizant of the fact. But, just coming back to, I know we were jokingly just dropping in the narcissism bit, but studies have shown that CEOs tend to possess narcissistic traits. And now, obviously, CEOs being leaders in, I'd say various sizes of organizations. How would you encourage someone who's perhaps, I think, lacking in that self-awareness to maybe take a deeper look? What would your advice be there?
Look, I think it's really twofold in the work that I do with CEOs. The first is around awareness, which is why I'm so grateful to be here with you and why I do this work.
Likewise.
Right? I always say that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have, right? So the first step has to be around awareness, actually making leaders and CEOs aware of the power of this skill set and whether they do or perhaps don't have it.
Yeah.
And often in my workshops and my masterclasses and stuff, the leaders will come to me at the end and say, oh my gosh, Mimi, I just realized I've never listened to anyone in my life. They have these epiphany moments. Yes, when they really honestly look at it and say, gosh, I don't think I've been doing that. So the first is awareness, but the second step has to be intention. Okay. Because this is a skill set, because it's an active skill set, you have to intentionally listen to someone. It's very easy to sit in a meeting and let your brain go elsewhere. Have I done that? Is the list done? Did I tell the CEO? Does HR know? Is the process? What about the suppliers? All of those things going on in your brain. You might be hearing what's going on in the room, but you're not listening. So intention is a really important part. And there are lots of ways people can build their intention,
I suppose
eye contact,
also,
all those things.
Yeah, and with social media and obviously being so hyper-connected in the world, there's so many distractions around us as well. So I suppose in their defense, or in most people's defense, not condoning, but I think we tend to get distracted because there's just so much content. Yes. And it's how do we get focused? How do we actually even be or become more present?
Yeah,
I think is becoming one of those challenges in today's workforce and just generally in the world. So let's just take it back a little bit. Let's rewind. Tell me a little bit about what triggered you to talk about empathy. What got you started on the first book?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, it was here in Dubai. So my journey is so intricately linked with this amazing city. But I moved here in 2018 and Dubai was a very different city, right? Pre-COVID. I think Dubai is one of the only places in the world that COVID just excelled. Yeah. It moved it forward in so many ways. Yeah. Obviously not to take away from the trauma of the time, but coming out of that trauma, the city has boomed.
It's how they've handled it. It's how the leadership has handled it.
Exactly, that kind of resilience as a city, which I think they've always had. But I came before COVID and I took over a business at the time, and the business was not, let's say, in the shape that I hoped it would have been when I arrived. And I remember Rowan being really overwhelmed. I was not at all ready for the business challenge at the time. And I met with a phenomenal coach here, and she was talking to me about my leadership style, and she asked me how I lead. And at the time, I spoke a lot about intuition, so being an intuitive leader. Yeah. And she asked me a question that, fundamentally changed my life, because she said to me, is it intuition or is it empathy?
Wow.
And I remember thinking, It's not empathy, right? How can it be empathy? What is empathy? Why is empathy in the workplace? Absolutely not. But I went away and I started to study empathy, and I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which was coined by Barack Obama in 2006.
I remember that.
Yeah, it fundamentally talks to the lack of connectivity in our world.
Right.
And once I discovered that, I could not believe, Rowen, that no one was talking about it. I remember being in my villa here in Dubai thinking, how is there this huge issue that no one is talking about? Maybe I should. So I did. And I probably had, I don't know, like 400 LinkedIn friends or something. And I just started getting up every day with this belief that the more we would speak about it, the more there would be. And I just broadcast into like a black hole and hope that somebody maybe read it, which probably they didn't. Yeah. But 5 years later, they are. So, you know, the world has changed a lot in 5 years.
So I have to ask, because I know a lot of listeners think in numbers.
Yes.
How many followers are you at now?
We're about 60,000 now.
Wow, that's incredible.
Even for me, I can't believe it, honestly.
60,000 people who are with you on this journey of empathy, who believe in what you have to say, who believe in the message, who are curious about it at the very least. And I think the message I'm taking away from this is also, I think it speaks to your persistence and your love for the subject matter, that you were really relentless almost, I'd say, in the beginning in spreading the message when perhaps no one was even fully aware of what it meant or
for sure.
Or
I think
its
they all
potential.
thought I was probably crazy for years, right? But yes, you talk there sort of about being relentless. I talk about consistency a lot. I think it's probably our most underestimated skill set, besides empathy, is consistency. You know, just getting up every day, especially as entrepreneurs, the city is full of them, and just carrying on, and how hard that is, Rowen. You know, I think so many people leave the corporate world perhaps not quite understanding how much you need that tenacity, that resilience to get up and do it every day. And then just celebrating each of the really small moments. Because, of course, you don't go from 400 to 60,000.
Not overnight.
Overnight, even if Insta makes it look so, right? So, you know, last week on LinkedIn, we reached 140,000 in a week.
That's incredible.
It is incredible because you just think that was never there, you know, and it's not about me at all. It's about awareness. It's about the fact that now people see empathy and don't run away.
I was going to say, because I don't think you're qualifying the success on the basis of numbers anyway. It was simply my curiosity, but it's really the pride in the message. That's what I'm getting from you. You're taking pride in the message. And I suppose what many people put it down to is purpose. And I know a lot of people, especially people that I'm speaking with as well, clients who are curious about finding their purpose.
So many.
And, you know, when I speak with someone like yourself, you know, who's you know, found her passion clearly, and you've put it in writing, you've put it into a book, you're out there, you're speaking on stages, you're here with me on this podcast, Mimi. What advice would you share with someone who's seeking their purpose?
Well, it's interesting you asked me this week because I've thought about it a lot in the last 2 weeks. There's a couple of things, yes, the universe working. I have a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, the first is that social media tells all of us that we need to find our purpose, and I actually think it's putting a huge amount of pressure on us. And I think sometimes we're already living in our purpose, but we don't know it. So one of the things I really believe is that the first step to finding your purpose is to self-reflect on what you already have. Because maybe you're already living it. It doesn't have to be, you know, world fame or global stages or solving, you know, world peace. It could be being a phenomenally effective HR manager and impacting the lives of the people at work. It could be being a mum. It could be working in the community. I mean, there's so many things that maybe you're already doing it. So even though the world tells us that we need to find this big, sparkly thing, maybe it's already here. So that's the first thing I would say.
There's some gratefulness to it as well.
Yes, like just being in the present and knowing that often what you're doing is purposeful. And it's not always, you know, the world might tell you to look for something else, but maybe you already have it. So that would be the first thing I would say.
It's a great starting point.
And the second thing I would say is that often, and for me, certainly this was the case, if you are open enough, your purpose will find you. We are so rushed and so busy and so stressed that sometimes we just don't see the opportunities that are there. And for me, however uncomfortable it was, and I have to be honest, it's been a lot of discomfort. I didn't know that this would become my purpose.
Wow.
I wasn't looking for it, for sure. I was in the corporate world. I was very happy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until maybe 4 years in, so quite recently, that I suddenly realised, I think I was always meant to do this.
Wow. Can I ask, what you mentioned just now, you were really happy at the corporate world. Were you happy? Were there moments where you doubted? Were there moments where you just felt like, is there something else? Could there have been something else? I'm curious.
No, not before I did this.
Oh, right. Okay.
Interestingly. But I think also it was a different time. When I started to do this work, as I said, we hadn't gone into COVID yet and the world hadn't changed.
Right.
So no, I don't think I ever doubted that I was meant to do that. I loved working. I always wanted to work. I always wanted a career. I was in advertising for many of those years. I loved it. I love creativity. I love storytelling. I was good at it.
Yeah.
Yes, it was stressful. And yes, there's all kinds of, drama and
Deadlines
politics.
and dramas. That's
but
typical.
no,
nature
I
of the
never
beast.
doubted that I was in the right place. I never, ever for 1 minute thought about being an entrepreneur ever.
Wow.
This was not my dream. It was not conscious.
Okay.
It became me rather than the other way around. But I do think that demands a lot of openness. You have to be very open. And honestly, I think you have to be quite brave.
Willing to try.
Yes.
I said on my LinkedIn that courage and curiosity are a couple of the themes that I will be pursuing this year, because I do find that so often, perfection is kind of like just, the guise for procrastination. And we're really kind of just, hanging on to, I'm going to wait for this perfect time. I'm going to wait for this to happen. I'm going to wait for, this sort of epiphany before I can take that next step. When really sometimes just through trial and error, just by putting ourselves out there and doing, we discover a new part of ourselves and some new skill sets even that could lead us to that path of purpose, or lead us to purpose, finding our purpose.
I think so. And I think you mentioned there sort of perfection. I don't think we should ever strive for that. I think we should strive for progress. Because on this entrepreneurial journey particularly, right, you have to just progress every day. And as long as you feel every day there is some progress, and it can be almost invisible, which is why I talk about that presence, that intentionality, which I know is trending, but I really mean it. Be intentional about what happened today. And, someone wrote to me on LinkedIn last night, very nice gentleman in Australia, and asked me, I just have a question for you. What's the one thing you're proud of this week? And I was like,
That's a great
I don't
question.
know. And then I wrote him what it was. And it was incredibly rewarding, even for me in my hotel room, just writing that at the end of the day. So I think we have to be very intentional about that progress. And the gap between expectation and reality is disappointment. So live in now. That's my advice.
I think the word there, expectation.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to someone about that recently, and we were talking about, even just on a different parallel or different tangent, the dating scene, right? People go in on their first date with great expectations, and most people do it. The same with an interview as well, a job interview. And, of course, you can completely understand that there's a lot of, feelings pegged to it. There's a lot of hope pegged to it. And everyone's going in with, a lot of the narrative we've sold ourselves prior to that.
Yeah.
Is this the one? And we're kind of almost, wanting to convert. We're in that conversion mindset. I feel like we've got to close the deal.
Yeah.
And it might not even be the right thing for us, but there's that expectation that we've set for ourselves that we've got to go and we've got to get it, or we've got to achieve X.
Yeah.
And when really, maybe it's just, it's rather cliche to say, but it's the process and enjoying that process and the progress that comes with it, rather than going out to a number of interviews and just saying, okay, I want to get the job. What if we said to ourselves, I'm going to meet these companies, I'm going to learn more, I'm going to showcase my skill sets and focus on what the doing as opposed to the outcome, like you said, that gap.
Yeah.
If we can close that gap, that would just be incredible for our own mindset as well as for the result.
I mean, I love that. I love that just listening to you for me. But yes, and something that gives me great peace is that I always believe that what's meant for me will come for me. Right. So that has really helped me, especially in the last year, because this work is growing and there is so much demand on my time.
Yeah.
And you never know, am I prioritizing the right thing today? Should I do this? There's so many options, right? And when you're on your own, you have nobody to, ask, what do you think most of the time? So I think that you're right. Expectation, as I said, that gap between expectation and reality nearly always results in some form of disappointment. So if you can just be open-minded about that, know that what is coming for a reason. And then also knowing, which of course, again, is a bit of a cliche, but it's that you learn through the things that don't work out. Not always now. I will look back now at something that perhaps was a great disappointment in 2024 or 2023. And now I can say, well, thank gosh I didn't do that. But at the time, I thought they were the best possible client or the best possible employer or whatever the case is. So, that belief can be very hard. But, my dad used to always say to me, it will be really hard until it's not.
That's a great saying.
It's a great saying. He was a great man. So it reminds me of that. I every day when it gets difficult, or when there is a opportunity that falls through, or I don't have enough money for the investment I want to make, or whatever it is, I remember that it will be really hard until it's not.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was just reflecting on that for a moment. I do very much. I agree with that sentiment and the thought, because it's also that presence as well, just being in that moment and focusing intentionally on the work you're doing, on the interactions you're having, on the conversations, and you never know where it leads. And I think now, finally, at the ripe young age of 38, I'm coming to understand a little bit more. When my mum had said as well, similar to what your dad was saying, it's more like everything in its time. And I never understood what that meant fully until now.
Yeah. And I think we didn't sort of plan to talk about this, but I think it comes back as well to being female leaders or just women who work. When you talk about that presence, because the media will tell us that we can have it all and do it all, and it's frankly not true, right? I believe that you make a series of choices. So right now, I'm here with you. Yeah. I chose to spend this time with you, and therefore I'm not with my daughter, right? Same with your little boy. Yeah. You are here with me and not with him. So right now we are mums outside of our children. That is a choice. It's an intentional choice. And I think making peace, as you were saying there, with just how you use your time, with what decisions you make, and then owning them. They won't always be right. If my little girl or your little boy is sick in this hour, we will feel terrible. Yeah. Because we were doing a podcast when our children were sick. But we made the best decision at the time that we committed to the decision.
With the information we had.
With the information we had and the context we were in. And as women, we live in guilt for that. We can't help it. We're constantly, we're constantly worrying about, am I charging the right amount? Am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Should I be in Dubai? Should I have gone to Paris? Should I have stayed at home?
All the what ifs.
1 million what ifs, right? Yeah. But I try, again, to really just know that what's meant for me will come for me. Don't worry about it. Make the right decision you have right now, and then put everything you have into that moment.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Mimi. And I think, a lot of women listening to this right now can probably relate to what you're saying. I mean, I know I certainly can. Life is a series of choices. It really is. And some of them are harder to make than others. And there's always got to be, I think, the expectation that we can have this perfect life is a bit of a stretch. And I was recently listening to something and someone who'd said that, you've got to make certain compromises. There will be certain things. And I think to think that we can escape any sort of compromise is actually impossible. Unrealistic.
Not even just unrealistic, impossible. Yeah. Life is a series of compromises, right? And we have to balance them.
So it's finding that, we can't benchmark ourselves against someone who's perhaps a bodybuilder and say, I'd like to have a body like that, and also be a CEO, and also, be an ever-present mom. It's not all going to happen at once. No. But what we might find, and I like to do this with some of my clients, the coaching wheel, the wheel of life.
Yes.
And you get this full picture on the kind of areas that you might be willing to take a little bit of a step back, and where can you adjust that? Okay, this is a level where I'm happy, that I'm happy at right now. I can do this, I can tackle this certain work stream or this certain aspiration at a later date. But for now, this takes precedence. And you give that, the scoring you want to. And that's been a game changer, I think, for many people who've worked with that framework. because we just think about, resetting our expectations and also appreciating, like you said, where we are.
And I think, we have a vision, and we should, of where we want to be and where our businesses are going to go, or our podcasts are going to grow, or whatever it is. But I think the reality is our vision of how we will feel when that happens is a reflection of our reality now and not the reality we are working towards.
Yeah.
And I know that's a bit to get your head around, but
I was going to say.
yeah, it is, right? But the reality is how you think you will feel when you achieve the thing that you're aiming for.
I love the breakdown of the process. I hadn't actually reflected on that myself when you think about it.
It's a reflection of who you are and what you want and how you feel today. So therefore live for that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it, like you said, it is a series of compromises, and you have to make those decisions and make peace with them. And I think it comes back as well to finding joy, which also is, I know, a cliche, and Instagram is full of tips, right? But if you are not happy with what you are doing, only you can change it.
Yeah.
No one can change it for you. So working out what it is, if it makes you really joyful to go to the gym, which I can tell you it definitely doesn't in my place. But if it did, I would go more often, right? So I think you have to also work out what it is in your life that makes you joyful.
And what you can make peace with.
What you can make peace with, and what you want versus what everybody else wants for you. That's
a good one. 100%, because I think so often we take on beliefs that aren't even ours. And it's, well, why do you want to be, in so-and-so job or profession? And most people just reflect back to, well, my parents were this, or they expected this, or they would, and it's all well-meaning as well. They want the best for us, in most cases. So I think people just haven't had the opportunity as well to discover. And I think especially now, as we're seeing, a lot of women entering perimenopause, menopause, rediscovering themselves. There's a great reset almost.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful, because you're seeing people on the second or even third wind just going for it. Yeah. And it's wonderful, because given that we live longer, and we can, it's about living longer, better and happier, and how can we make the next seasons of our life even more meaningful, I feel. But I want to just bring it back a little bit to the workplace now, and tackle AI in the workforce, because we talked a little bit or touched on loneliness. And I feel that with all the tech available to us, that's essentially meant to make our lives easier, faster, scalable, automate, all these big words that we're hearing. I know some people are feeling either joyful or fearful. And I'd love to have your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right. I think a lot of people are fearful. And people are always asking me, do you think I'm going to lose my job to AI? Every time technology comes in, someone told me, I had a dinner recently with an slightly older leader than us, and she was telling me that she remembers when she introduced the internet to her team and said to them, she remembers it. She says, I remember sitting in this meeting room telling them there's this thing called the internet and we're going to start using it. And the people in the room were petrified, but what about my job, and what about my life, and how are we going to manage our clients? But of course, we all carried on and life got better. Yeah. So I understand why people are fearful, because as human beings, change is scary, and that is our response to a fear for survival. So we are wired to survive, and change makes us feel, at least from a neuro-linguistic and neuro-programming point of view, that we might be at risk of dying, quite literally, because of the change.
Because of the threat as well, right?
Right. But of course, we're going to be fine. AI is just going to enable different ways of working.
Keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on, exactly. It's going to change things, but it's going to, it will make life better. It will come with complexities, because all change does. But I believe, especially in the work I do, that without these technologies, how are we ever going to scale the change that we all want to see? With empathy, for example, people say, but, AI has no empathy. And I say to them, no, AI probably has better empathy than you.
Ooh, tell me more.
So, I mean, empathy obviously is an ability to understand other people. If I'm sick, very tired, unwell, in hospital, pregnant, a million other things could interfere with my ability to empathize with you today, even if I want to.
Right.
But if you train AI like a bot brilliantly to be able to empathize consistently, then the question is, right, can they being the bots, empathize more consistently, more regularly than human beings? Based on the empathy deficit, I would say the answer is yes, because us humans are not very good at it, Rowen. That's why we have an empathy deficit.
I think that's a pretty good, that's a completely different lens, and I think that's a wonderful way to challenge the thought process, the human thought process, because I mean, from what I understand of AI, and it's an evolving thing, it works with a set of frameworks, very clear decision making, very pragmatic, almost logical, which a lot maybe believe that it directly contradicts with the emotional capacity of a human. And yet at the same time, with our deep conditioning as well, many humans, to your point, if I understand you correctly, Mimi, are also, I wouldn't say devoid of, but rather struggle with embracing empathy because of everything else. And we almost are unable to refer to those frameworks in that time because there's so much else going on. So someone might not realize that their colleague's really unwell and still expect X deliverable off them without going, oh, hold on a minute.
Yeah, maybe something's off.
Yeah, when this person has said they're feeling unwell, this might be why, or what can I do to help? Because they're so caught up with having to meet said deliverable or deliver to certain timescales. Did I understand your concept correctly, Mimi?
Yes, you absolutely did. And I think, earlier in a different way, we were talking about the gap between expectation and reality. Often we have an expectation for empathy from somebody and we don't get it, and it's extremely disappointing. So, for example, a female might go home tonight from work having had a really terrible day and just really want their husband to hear them and just listen to them about their day. And when they get home and they try to do that, the husband in this case is, tired, stressed, angry, thinking about his boss, and is not listening. And what happens is that becomes an argument. You are not listening to me. I am listening to you, but all those things happen, right? So there is a huge disappointment, expectation, reality, disappointment. She feels unheard. He then feels unheard because she's reflecting to him.
Yeah.
And actually, for the sake of debate, if she sat down with her cup of tea and asked her ChatGPT or her Genie or whoever she's using on her AI platform, this is how I'm feeling, what do you think about it? Arguably, on call, on demand, she will get the listening she's looking for without that interruption, without that risk of somebody else letting her down.
So it's not just employees who have to worry about their jobs now, it's the spouses too.
There we go. I'm gonna cut it through all of it. But again, talking about this.
I take your point, Mimi. Yeah,
right. So a few weeks ago, I had a similar case. I was having a very similar conversation. So my friend at lunch took out her phone and asked her Genie, and she said to her Genie on her phone, hey, I'm feeling very sad today. I'm feeling very lackluster. Yeah. What's your advice? And this AI came back with the most phenomenal answer. And it was amazing how it was able to pull from so many parts of her life. I mean, she was quite astounded, to reassure her and to say, actually, Mimi, you've done this, you're doing this, you recently appeared on Rowen's podcast, you had a phenomenal trip to Dubai, look at everything you're achieving. She was, wow, Mimi, I don't need to ask anybody ever again. So is it going to replace us? No, but is there a role for that consistent capacity to feedback, to listen, to just redirect when humans are not that consistent? Yeah. I'm not saying it should replace us, but I am saying that it can revolutionize how we engage.
Well, I would agree there. And I think especially given that tech is evolving so rapidly as well, it's not far off that it will start to develop a degree of emotional intelligence, although it remains to be seen how much.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us do think at times or contemplate, well, I wish so-and-so would have a little more emotional intelligence. And I think people can be a little bit more resistant almost to the change than the bot is.
Yeah, and Rowen, today as we sit here, and this is an awful statistic, but 330 million people don't have a single friend. So if those 330 million people who have no friend, who are lonely and alone, which are different things, can at home this evening open their phone and get some advice, get some companionship, get some content from someone, albeit a machine, versus no one, you can argue that that's something is better than nothing. And, there's value,
and
exactly, that's
moment, the word. In a really vulnerable state, assuming all things equal and ethical, that might be a reliable or perhaps even the only source.
And
of
of course, people are going to argue with me and say, but human is better and real life, of course it is. But in a void when that is not available, and not all of us have that advantage. There are millions, 300 million and plus, who don't have someone to talk to, who are never going to hear the word coach, let alone access one, who don't have parents that love them, or marriages that are secure, or even countries that are secure. So in a void of the luxury of human connection, which is a luxury, I believe that AI can change people's lives. And we shouldn't push it away based on our lens versus what it could do for them.
If we go back to age-old theory, Maslow's hierarchy, you've got self-actualization sitting at the very top and connection and all of that, which, like you said, Mimi, could be something that some of us take for granted and others are desperately searching for and missing and needing their lives because they're just going through the motions, whether it's from being in war-torn, conflicted areas to slightly impoverished communities and others, and even just in our day-to-day lives, which is one of the reasons why, and even in a busy city like Dubai and in a country like the UAE, I love the year of community initiative.
Yes, I love it too.
And the message is powerful. It's incredible because it really puts a focus on the longevity, our longevity as a society and our ability to really be there for one another in different contexts, of course. And there's a number of ways to kind of dissect what community could be like for that person. They might need some support in the business environment. They might need some support in a social environment. And coming to your point on loneliness, I know a number of entrepreneurs feel this. Have you ever felt lonely, Mimi?
I don't feel lonely, but I think that's because my purpose is to overcome loneliness. So I am so connected all the time. But obviously many people do, 52%. And I think what's interesting about the Year of Community is that if we're being very frank about it, the government wouldn't have put it in place if they didn't know that there was a need, right? So the reason the government of this country or any country are putting in platforms and programs around community are because they know, let's be honest, the value of not having it. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it out of the goodness of society. They know their people in this country, wherever they're from around the world, that the ability for the UAE to thrive, to survive and to thrive, to do well, to achieve its objectives, to continue with its economic growth, they need community.
100%.
It's coming from the very top, right? It's a need.
And as the leadership recognizing that need as well, to your point.
Absolutely phenomenal, right?
Incredible. And as we'd said earlier at the start of this podcast, what the UAE has done so well, even in a rather globally challenging situation like COVID, was they put in place what are really sensible policies that spoke to the vision, the values, and the betterment of society. They thought, how can we balance economic need with the imperative social need? And I just feel that if companies and leaders imbibe this sort of way of thinking, and even around the world, I might add, where empathy is kind of lacking, I'd say, maybe entering some challenging territories with withdrawals of certain policies and changing of others. And again, I appreciate that there's various ways of doing things, and you've got to speak to the need of your people and the resident citizens of your communities. So I think that's a lot of good things that we can take away from this experience, I feel.
Yeah, and as you said, I think for a government to recognise that, what we know is that the World Health Organization has termed that loneliness is a global health endemic issue. And once that happens, there has to be action. The highest burden on our healthcare system worldwide is not cancer, diabetes, heart disease. It's loneliness.
Really?
It is.
Oh, I had no
right?
idea.
So the fact that the government here is ahead, and it always is, the UAE is always ahead of everybody else, in putting that in place is so critical to who we are as humans. As you said, economic growth, GDP, is directly tied to social economic cohesion. And countries like the UAE and Saudi as well, to a certain extent, so much of the Gulf actually, are very ahead of that narrative and of understanding that it will take people time, especially in a country where we have 180 nationalities. If we're being very honest, people generally stick to their tribe, right? And what that means is that the English stay with the English and the French with the French and the Nigerians with the Nigerians on the whole. That's not to say that we're not an integrated society and we all have many friends.
No, but there might just be the tendency to
Yes, because we as
connect with
humans,
like-minded.
we like to like, as in we resort to like, right? People that share our
What we're familiar
heritage, our
with.
culture, our language, our food, our behaviors, right? So if you have a country that is thriving, like the UAE, but with 180 at least nationalities in one space, the government has to find ways to encourage community, to encourage connection, to encourage togetherness in a world which at large is disconnected.
Which is wonderful because it's an incredible way to tie in a progressive outlook with what is also rather traditional to the region and a cultural thing, I would say. Because again, there's different ways of doing things, of course, and the region does embrace hospitality. It's a very warm, hospitable environment, and that sort of comes across in the interactions I've had with Emirati people as well. But I think because we're coming to a close on time, I can't believe it already. I wanted to have some sort of final thoughts and really maybe some good examples from you of where you've seen empathy in practice that's really resonated with you.
I probably going to answer it slightly differently, but I think where I see let me reframe that. I was going to say the best example, so I'm not sure it's the best, but the most consistent or sustained examples, that kind of exemplification of empathy in society is in everyday action. So one of the things that I'm super passionate to teach people about, which is so simple and it's amazing you need to teach it, is to use people's names, right? And if you watch back in this show alone, I will have said your name a fair few times, right? To make sure that there's connection between us, which of course there is. I think that is where the gap is, and it's where we can make the most consistent shift. So using people's names, making eye contact, moving in life in a way that isn't, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? That is not an engagement, right? That is not a connection.
No.
And someone in one of my audiences yesterday said to me, Mimi, I think as humans, we're very good at communicating and very poor at connecting in that communication. And I said to him, sir, I couldn't agree more. So where do I see the best exemplification of that? I think is in people that get that right on a one-to-one level in life. Once you can do it 1-to-1, 1-to-3, 1-to-5, then you can start to change your organization. But to really create connection with someone is an individual reality. Where next time you go to the coffee shop and you order your matcha latte, make eye contact, actually have a moment when they say, they're on auto drive. They'll say, hi, what do you want? What do you want next? Right? Stop them and say, how are you? You'll see them go, and then they smile. They say, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? Right? You have to.
It's almost unexpected, which is a little bit sad, isn't it?
It's so sad, but it's easy.
I love
to
a bit
change,
of small talk.
right? It's easy to change. So, yeah, that's I could tell a million stories of it, but I think that's really where I see it is in those micro moments of social connection that you, that I, that all of us are capable of doing and will literally change the world.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And of course, so many questions and so many things I'd like to talk about. I do have to ask, of course, is there also sort of a cultural aspect to it? Because, certain cultures, I just mentioned earlier about the, culture and the hospitality in the Emirati community, and some of the others that I've witnessed, because people are really friendly here. We're all kind of, a lot of people are expats, which also automatically brings in that commonality, at least in the UAE, from what I can tell. But generally, when we're talking about connection, do you find that certain cultures might find that a little bit too chatty, or and some others might embrace it a bit more? So
sure. Look, I think
how does one kind of
we could talk
navigate
about this for a very long time, but fundamentally, yes, of course, there are always cultural norms and there are cultural expectations and hierarchies and contexts that you have to bear in mind. For example, in some of the very sort of North Asian countries, eye contact is reserved for a few, so you have to know how to handle it, that type of thing. But fundamentally, where you see the most amount of natural empathy is in very collectivist societies, of which the Gulf is one. You're going to find that in parts of Africa, parts of Asia, India, South Asia, right, where we live, the people live in a very collectivist society. In those environments, you are going to see higher levels of cultural empathy. There is more connectivity. You see more multi-generational homes. You see more communal eating and living. I also think that countries that are slightly slower have higher levels of empathy because you can't empathize with someone in a rush, right? It's not possible. Yeah. So, for example, in Malaysia, where I live, the Malaysian culture is just slightly slower, for example, than Singapore, which is right next door, where everybody's on the run every second of the day. And therefore, do I experience higher levels of natural empathy in my daily interactions in Kuala Lumpur than I do in Singapore? Yes. So for sure, there is connection to culture.
I'd have to agree with you there on the rush thing. It brings me back to a little experience I had in New York. And New York's known to be a rather busy city, you know, I was actually in Times Square, so it couldn't get more busy.
No. And
I arrived with my luggage and I was running around. And it's not to say that of all New Yorkers. I think there's some I've friends in New York who are incredibly lovely. But the general tone I gathered from that experience was that people were getting somewhere fast. They had to catch that subway or they had to get to the next appointment. And so, you know, I was off asking for directions and it was very abrupt. This is where you need to go. There's the spot. That's it. Yeah. No more, no less. Got to LA. It was a completely different vibe. And we're talking within the same country, really, right? And same thing. Arrived, knew no one, met no one, unfamiliar with the place. Hi, you know, could you help me find so-and-so location? I'd like to get to my hotel. And, the vibe was entirely different. The conversation was laid back, you know, from the Uber driver to the concierge. How was your day? How was your flight? Dubai? That's amazing. They had all the time in the world for me. Yeah. So, again,
it's also different between like you were saying, between cities, but also between urban and rural in any country in the world, right? When you move in towards rural communities, and hopefully by the end of this year, I'm going to have made a documentary on this. Ooh. But when you move into rural communities outside of the cities, you are also going to see higher levels of natural empathy, inquiry, curiosity, time.
Oh, you've got to let me know when it's out.
So yes, so there is definitely a lot going on. And what I would say to conclude that is that empathy has two enemies. One is low time and the other is high stress. So any environment like Dubai, to be honest, right, where we live under low time, high stress because we're just so busy growing, we have to be very intentional to slow down, to be present, to actually intentionally connect with people because it's the secret to all success.
I would agree. I mean, did I see on your post at some point in my typical LinkedIn stalking, as one does, that you talked about disengagement at work as well? And could this be one of the reasons just everyone's head down, getting really busy, not all the time sure about what they're being busy with, but they just...
Lowest in 10 years, Rowan. Wow. The lowest engagement in 10 years. We now only have 31% of the global workforce that are actively engaged. Oh. And the cost of that disconnection is $8.8 trillion a year, which is costing the UAE $10 million an hour.
And this is the actual math.
This is the actual maths. And in Saudi, it's $21 million an hour. So exactly, right? In the time we have recorded this show, the UAE has lost $10 million in disengagement.
Okay, so I think there's no better closing note than that. If you have to summarize, Mimi, the golden nugget, what's your advice? How do we solve it?
Oh my gosh, one golden nugget. I would say that fundamentally we are all more alike than we are different. And that a focus on that is probably the one core way for us to reconnect our societies and our businesses. We have many gaps, but with intention, we can fill all of them.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Mimi, what a wonderful conversation as always. So great to see you again. Thank you for coming on this show. And I hope you guys have enjoyed listening. So if you have any questions for us, drop us a line. You can connect with Mimi or myself. This is Boardrooms and Breakthroughs. Thank you for listening.